Well, I think the difference between the first year and the third year is that this year the organization feels a little more mature. The first year, I think everybody was like, now what do we do? Where do we go? What happens next? This year, everything seems very well organized, well thought out. So it's nice to see in a couple of years that the organizers have learned pretty well what works and what works less well. I didn't really prepare anything, frankly. I kept asking Ahmed about it, and he said, oh, no, it's just going to be a conversation. So he told me not to prepare anything. So however he wants to approach, the topic is, I guess, how we'll do it. Well, it's a broad topic. I think that in many ways the idea of talking about place or location in cinema is a very interesting place to go. I was very curious to attend the conference that just ended on the desert in Arab cinema because, of course, much of the Arab world has significant portions of its land that is desert. And so I was curious to see how that particular topic, would be addressed. Again, it was interesting to learn the names of new films and hear some of the different approaches. But, for me, I think that I guess I'm much more of an urban person, so I'm always much more drawn to films of the city. And if I think of the Egyptian film In the Last Days of the City, that seemed to me like really an extraordinary film that was really about a person, but also very much about Cairo, about a city. Yeah, well, I have to say I was a little handicapped because, of course, I'm listening to the translation, and the translation at times was a little bit hard to follow. Some of the speakers spoke very quickly, and so I think the translator was having a hard time keeping up in a way. But again, it was interesting hearing three different aspects of it. The first gentleman spoke a lot about Lawrence of Arabia and ways in which the desert was used in that. The second one traced a little bit of a history of Egyptian cinema and significant films that used that. And then the third, which I found perhaps the most enlightening, talked really about the way in which the desert has appeared in Saudi films especially. I have to admit I've seen very few Saudi films, so it's very hard for me to say what's their specific character. I'd like to think that right now they're trying 1,000 different approaches and that eventually maybe some approaches will feel more fertile or more correct than others and they'll go on with them. But it's hard for me to draw a general kind of description of Saudi film that way. Again, I think with all the Arab cinemas, there are many, many different ways. The topic is vast, so why should Arab filmmakers be limited to a certain approach or a certain aesthetic? Let them have every aesthetic. I think one of the things that we are really missing right now, at least in the United States, but I sense it's a much larger problem, is the lack of what you might call long-form criticism. That is, in English, 2,000, 3,000 words like we used to get from people like Pauline Kael and Andrew Saris and Stanley Kaufman and all these really fine critics in the 60s and 70s. Now, unfortunately, reviews have become much shorter, and I tend to think that most reviewing is what you might call consumer guidism. That is, these are little reviews that are telling you whether it's worth seeing a film or not seeing a film. They're not there to discuss the film or to enter into a dialogue with the film, but just to sort of give you a commercial piece of advice, like, oh, don't bother with this one, or, oh, yeah, run out and see that one. That seems to be the trend that so much writing about film is going. And, at one point, of course, we had more magazines where people could, of course, write longer pieces. Many of them are disappearing. So it's sadly not a great time, I think, for film criticism. I'm not sure what the rules are. I'm not sure what the rules of criticism are. Other than being fair, I think that you can't be unfair to a film. That is, claim the film is doing something or not doing something that it should do. That doesn't seem to me the way that a critic should approach the work. The critic should look at the work and really talk about the work as is. So for me, I don't really understand that concept of being fair. It's really a question of engaging with the work, and once you engage with it, offering your opinion, either positive or negative or somewhere in between. Well, I think that, look, as I think it was Francois Truffaut once said, that everybody has two jobs, their own job and film critic. Everybody's a film critic. So I think really we are seeing a disappearance in the United States, and I think other places as well, of professional film critics. First of all, there are fewer newspapers and magazines, and even those that exist very often might use one critic, and that critic writes for 20 or 30 newspapers. So that's an unfortunate trend. On the other hand, there is the internet, and there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of blogs published every day covering every type and every aspect of cinema. I tend to think the people who write for blogs are generally not so good. But, it is nice that it's very democratic. Anyone can state their opinion. And of course, among those people are some people like, say, the former critic of the Village Voice, Jay Hoberman, or Dave Kerr, who works at the Museum of Modern Art, who write really excellent and very informative things on their blogs. But it's a lot of stuff to get through before you get to the few that I think are really worth your time. It's very difficult to say why there aren't more, say, Arab films in any of the big festivals. I'd like to think that everyone has the same process. Everyone's trying to get the best films that they see. When I worked at the New York Film Festival, we saw every year over 2,000 films, and a number of them would be Arab films, and we were very proud and pleased to show films from Arab countries when we saw something that we really liked and really felt we could support. So the only thing to do is to continue to sort of send films and whatever, and hope that they get picked up. I think in terms of building audiences, one of the things that I think works well and could work well would be to sort of have more showings of Arab films, perhaps specialized festivals and things like that. With those, the audience, and in that audience are the critics, they'll become more used to Arab films and learn to appreciate them more. Again, I am a little sort of behind the times. I know Carthage has always had a very good reputation. I once was on the jury at the Cairo Film Festival. It was an interesting experience. Trying to think of what other festivals are in the Arab world that I know of. I mean, which one? I've never been, so I don't know. I mean, I would imagine that it's well funded. So I know that Qatar is starting a festival now. I've worked for a few years for something they do called Qumra. Qumra is more really a workshop where basically they bring in a number of young filmmakers and some what they call Qumra masters, people who are well established in the field. And I do master classes during that for them. But now I believe in just a few weeks they're going to have their first international festival in a way. So hopefully that'll work out. Yes, that's often true. But I sort of believe that when an artist finishes his or her film and that let it out in the public, it's no longer theirs. It now belongs to the world. And the world will see it and talk about it in the way that the world wants. There are a lot of cases of people who wrote novels and they wanted the novels to say one thing, but when people read the novels, they believed something else. So you can never really, in a certain way, judge or predict what the reaction will be in the public. But I think, again, artists make works and they put them out. And when they put them out, then they're no longer really the sole property of the artist. They now belong to the world. So people can say, but I made a great love story. And some would say, I didn't think it was a love story. It didn't seem like a love story to me at all. That happens. And, for me, that's really the history of art. The best advice to any critic is see as many films as you can. It is amazing the access we all have now. I mean, between online and downloads and sites like Mubi or Criterion or whatever, you can really see the world cinema. And I think if you want to be a film critic, please educate yourself. And the only way you can educate yourself is by seeing films. As many as you can, and sometimes several times, because you get to learn them that much more. So, back when I was beginning, it was so much more difficult to see films. You had to really travel or do something to try and see some rare films. Now, many of them have become incredibly available. And I think that that's a great thing, and I think that should really aid young film critics.